Hi, folks. In this story set, we are getting into that's what's called the modernist era in American literature. And we've covered sort of the early development of the Romantic tradition. You've looked at the realist and naturalist traditions of the early 20th century. And pretty early into the 20th century, we get into the First World War. Now, American literary tradition is marked by wars. It is marked by the Revolutionary War through the Civil War. Then we have the Civil War through World War I. That is the period of realism and modernism, the Gilded Age, Mark Twain, that we covered in your last story set. And now, following World War I up until World War II, we are getting into the modernist tradition. By the way, can you believe how much time we've covered at this point? There's a lot of American literature so far, right? But we are getting into what's known as the modernist era. The modernist era includes Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Faulkner and some of the biggest names in American literature, probably. It also covers the Harlem Renaissance, which is going to be the focus of our novel study in the course. So there's a lot to talk about within modernist literature. So following World War I, you have modernism develop, and what happens is essentially modernism is associated with this period of bold and fast-paced living. So I want you to think about what you know about the 1920s, right? The Jazz Age. The Jazz Age is definitely going to be something that you will see sort of represented in a very sort of despondent way in F. Scott Fitzgerald's Babylon Revisited. But it's also the dawn of the modernist era. So themes of modernism include confusion. So you have not only, remember the Gilded Age or the realist era has a huge wealth inequality. And then we have the Great Depression. You have the crash of the 20s and you have the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. So you do have a lot of sort of disillusionment. We have the World War. You have a lot of sort of confusion about the world, a lot of disillusionment about the world, a lot of pessimism about the world, and a lot of isolation, people feeling very alone in what it is that they're going through. And I think that there's no two better stories to encapsulate that confusion and isolation and disillusionment with the world than Hemingway's Soldier's Home and Fitzgerald's Babylon Revisited. Seiler, who is a scholar on modernism, has said, although all the modernist works are very different, they all share a common purpose, which was to capture the essence of modern life. So we're continuing the realist tradition, but the world has evolved. We've gone through a world war. We have, seen the highs and lows of our economic system. The purpose of most modernist literature is written in a pessimistic way. Most modern works reflected the thoughts and confusion among most Americans, especially during the Great Depression and the two world wars. The chaotic literature revealed the instability of the American people's mindset as they attempted to understand what was going on around them. There was also a loss of faith and hope in the American people during this time period and a collapse of morality and values. And that collapse of morality and values you see in the Jazz Age. This is the era of the miniskirts and flappers and drinking to excess. But you still have these people who are, sort of riding high on their lucky streak, their wealth prior to the Great Depression, and you have people who are swinging down low on it. And I think that these two stories are really just a great encapsulation of the modernist tradition. So let me tell you a little bit about Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, the two folks that you are reading. So Ernest Hemingway, arguably probably one of the most famous American authors of all time. He won a Nobel Prize. He won a Pulitzer. He's, when you think of American authors, one of the first things that comes to mind is probably Hemingway. Now, why was Hemingway so popular? Something to note about Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and William Faulkner, who's another modernist author, is during this era, authors are starting to become celebrities. Hemingway had a celebrity persona. Fitzgerald had a celebrity persona, and that very much influences their trajectory in a lot of ways. In the American literary canon, one of the things we often talk about is who is left out and who is included. And three names that are absolutely included are Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Faulkner, and these were three huge celebrities, and of course their status, their identities, and their demographic helped to be as part of that culture. So Hemingway has a mythic persona. He is very known as this. He is known as this like hyper masculine, adventurous guy. He once got in a fight with a shark, tried to shoot a shark, and then got in a fight with it and won. He was in 2 separate plane crashes. I mean, this guy's history, I mean, he was into boxing and bullfighting and hunting and deep sea fishing, and he was just like this very masculine, adventurous persona. Now, in his own life, he really wanted to go to war. He really wanted to take part in World War I, but he wasn't able to because of his eyesight. And so when the army told him, no, you can't go fight in the war, but he said, well, I'm going to go anyway. He joined the Red Cross, and he went over with the Red Cross, and he was injured in a mortar explosion, nearly killed him, as a matter of fact. And his nurse in that first mortar explosion ended up being his first wife. But he was sent home, and then he became a war reporter. And Hemingway's style of war reporting was incredibly influential to the tradition of journalism. And the reason this is important is because that informs Hemingway's style of writing overall. Hemingway is infamously known for writing in a very simple, straightforward, non-elaborate way. As a matter of fact, the novel, which, you know, arguably won him the Nobel Prize, For Whom the Bell Tolls, or The Old Man and the Sea, is written at about a 4th grade reading level. So Hemingway is not, you know, writing in these very ostentatious, inflated types of languages. Hemingway is writing very plainly, very straightforward. And this comes to be known as his theory of no omission, or what he coins as the iceberg theory. And the iceberg theory is that you offer the tip of the iceberg in the story, and the rest of the story lies beneath. And Hemingway believed that any author should know all of these things that he leaves out, but the reader being able to sense them, the reader being able to infer them based on the story that is created, that is part of where the dignity of a story comes from. So what you'll get in Soldier's Home is a very brief, very limited, just snapshot of Krebs' experience. But what I want you to pay attention to is everything that's left unsaid. And what are the things that Hemingway's left unsaid that sort of speak to these ideas of disillusionment, confusion, isolation, pessimism that we see in the modernist tradition. And the second story you're reading is Babylon Revisited from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is most famous for The Great Gatsby. If you have read or seen The Great Gatsby, then you know what The Great Gatsby is all about. It's all about excess, right? And sort of, you know, the American dream is you know, a disillusioned ideal that's that's inaccomplishable, or whatever you want to distill that novel's theme down to. But essentially, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald is writing very much in the Jazz Age, and you're going to read this short story about a man who was riding high in the Jazz Age, and you know, full of you know, jazz and money and booze and friends, and then everything collapses with the stock market, and he is trying to get custody of his daughter back. He's also dealing with the loss of his wife, and I don't want to give anything away about that story, about, you know, the details surrounding her death, but I do want you to think about in that story who's culpable, who's carrying the guilt, who's, you know, what is it again that Fitzgerald is leaving unsaid that we're supposed to be picking up on here. These are, as I mentioned, 2 great encapsulations of the sort of facets of modernism, both this disillusionment post-war and this disillusionment in the Jazz Age, that's sort of taking down the facade of this romantic American ideal, taking down the facade of fixing everything, and just sort of looking around in pessimism and disillusion in a very artful and internalized sort of way. These stories very much focus on the experience of the 2 main characters, and you want to think about what it is that Hemingway and Fitzgerald are trying to portray with those characters. I look forward to hearing what you think.